Welcome to the Power of Now What, a podcast on overcoming the various challenges and problems that one encounters when on the spiritual path, when on a spiritual journey, when engaged in a practice or discipline such as meditation, and even post-awakening and post-enlightenment. This is episode 15 on the subject of the fear of going crazy on the spiritual path, the ever-present worry about insanity. What if these incredible spiritual experiences that I'm having are just me going nuts? What if I'm just delusional in all of this? And it's a very common concern, a very common worry for people on the spiritual journey. But fear not. Fear not. It is a concern that I think a lot of people have, particularly in the early stages, but very soon you realize it is not something to be concerned about at all, because as it will transpire, you are not going crazy. You are, in fact, going sane. It's the previous you that was crazy, and I can attest to this from my personal experience. I mean, my previous very egoic, very mind-identified life, I'm walking around as a morbidly obese alcoholic with tons of health problems, tons of anxiety, tons of depression, and just thinking I'm perfectly sane and perfectly normal, which, to be fair, it is kind of normal to be walking around in that state. Sadly, in the modern world, that is quite a normal state to be walking around in. And as usual, just because something is normal doesn't mean that it's healthy. And just because something is normal does not mean that it's sane, which is very relevant to today's topic. Now, there are a few other areas within this field that I thought I would talk about as well. Mostly because this, the fear of going crazy actually has a very, very simple solution that I'm going to speak about first, and actually that kind of knocks it on the head straight away. But I can't make an entire podcast out of that single point. So there are a couple of other areas that I thought I would cover as well in this episode, such as there's quite a common one of what if all of this is just wishful thinking? What if all of this is a sort of like a toxic positivity almost? What if this is just a delusion? I mean, isn't it quite convenient? It's only ever the present moment. I don't really need to worry about all the things that I used to worry about. Isn't that just a sort of magical thinking? Isn't that too easy? Isn't that an easy answer? That's something I would like to cover later on. So firstly, to this very common fear. So let's take the example that you're somebody who has begun their meditative practice, or in whatever form you have begun your spiritual journey. Now, my favorite metaphor for this is that the spiritual journey, we're all climbing this mountain, and at the top of the mountain, we're all aiming for the same peak. There is only one peak, which is total serenity, enlightenment, self-actualization, whatever you really want to term it. And if I might be so bold as to suggest that the peak of this mountain is a place where there is no more ego. There are no more individual, temporary, finite, separate body minds. It's just the singular, infinite consciousness, and it's bliss. Up there, right at the top, in the stratospheric heights of enlightenment. All it is normal everyday experience, but without the ego. That's all it is. It's normal everyday life, but without the story. You're just experiencing it as pure consciousness itself. That's what lies at the top of that mountain. And that's the place we're all going to. It's self-actualization. And everyone can still have their individual expression. Of course they can. We all have this individual body-mind that has its unique interests, it has its unique talents and skills and outlooks and experiences, its unique physical expression, all of it. The infinite universal consciousness wishes to expand and experience itself through this multitude of forms. However, at the top of this mountain, there is a singular experience, which is that of total bliss, total serenity. But everybody starts their journey at the bottom of the mountain, and we all start at different points. So that's why there are so many different spiritual paths, and they're all good. They're all good because we're all going to the top of this mountain. Now, some people's journey is going to be a lot slower. Maybe where they started the mountain, it's just a very long, slow, steady, gradual pace upwards all the way to the top. Maybe that's more one of the paths that has sort of stages and levels, and it just sort of goes in a very nice, steady rhythm all the way up to the top. That sounds really nice, doesn't it? Other people may have a bit of a steeper journey, and the spiritual path is begun in so many ways. There's lots of different triggers. You can have people that have near death experiences. You can have people that just have spontaneous experiences just out of nowhere, no background in spirituality. It's just boom, one day it just bam, their just mind is blown. Like 40,000 watts through a 40-watt light bulb for no reason at all. It does happen. Sometimes it's just through traumatic experience. Other times it's through there are so many different paths, and everybody starts somewhere different to everybody else, and there's no one path that's any better than any other. But I'd be willing to bet that at some point along that journey, everyone will question at some point, hang on a minute, hang on. is this just me going a little bit bananas here? Is this me just going a little bit cuckoo? Because naturally it's going to feel like that, because the old framework that you are using to perceive and interpret and understand reality is beginning to dismantle. So naturally, it's going to feel a little bit unsettling. That's the nature of the spiritual journey. So that's the first bit of reassurance, really, that I'd like to give you, is that it's not a bug, it's a feature. it's not a sign that something's going wrong. It's actually a sign that something's going right. Because the part of you that is worried that this whole thing is just you going crazy is the old ego structure, the old framework with which you have been navigating the world is beginning to dismantle. Now, I would say, if I might be so bold, that if you've had a more dramatic entrance into the spiritual journey, such as one of the more traumatic or near death or even drug induced experiences that got you started on the journey, I would suggest you might be a little more prone to this worry and this fear. And it might just take a little slowing down on your spiritual trajectory in order to just ground yourself and reorient yourself in the world a little bit. Because there's very few people that shoot straight to the end. It does happen, but there's very few people who just shoot straight to the top. And if you've had a big jump start into the spiritual journey, that could be incredibly unsettling. I sympathize. It would be a lot to try and download into your brain too soon. It'd be like trying to download like 10 gigabytes into a 1 gigabyte USB. It might blow it, So I would suggest, if you have had a very dramatic beginning in your spiritual experience and you're very worried about, am I just going nuts? Just slow down a bit. There really is no rush. There is no rush, because after all, we have an infinite amount of time to get to the top of this mountain. Isn't that great? It's the one journey where there is no time limit, because we have an infinite amount of time to get to the top, and we're all going to make it. We really are. That's the most reassuring thing that I think I could possibly say. We are all going to make it to the top of this mountain. The reason you think that there's a chance that you might not make it to the top is because you're looking left and right and some people look like they've stopped. But we have an infinite amount of time to get to the top. If not this lifetime, you'll get it in the next one. Don't worry. So back to this, the fear of going crazy, the fear of going nuts, because the old ego structure is beginning to drop away. It sort of panics as it goes down. I've used the analogy before of when you jump off a diving board, but just as you jump off, you panic, turn around and grab hold of the diving board. So now you're no longer on the diving board, but you've not dropped into the pool yet. That's where a lot of people are, and that's where a lot of panic takes place. All that you need to do is let go. Or if you're feeling particularly worried and panicked, just climb back up onto the board, because again, we have an infinite amount of time to make this happen. So let's say you're on this spiritual journey, you are on the spiritual path, and you are beginning to really feel it. You're beginning to really experience this peace, this bliss, this inner silence. Hang on. It's correct. There is no future. There is no past. I experience this directly every single moment. What all these people on YouTube and all these books that I read were right. There is no future. There's no such thing. It's all happening in my mind. There is no past. It doesn't exist. It's been and gone. It can only exist in my mind as a memory, and a memory arises within the now. Furthermore to this story that I have been telling myself, the story of me with my name and my body and my job and my salary and my pension, and what am I going to do about my relationships, and am I liked, and do I have enough friends, and do I wear the right clothes, and do I look good enough, am I a good enough person, am I doing it right? Everyone else is doing it right and I'm doing it wrong. Am I making enough money? Do I need to do more? Am I hitting the gym enough? And so on and so on. This endless story. Oh, it turns out it's just a story. I can shut the book and put it away. And suddenly I'm happy. That thing that I was looking for this entire time, I am now happy. But at some point, you may come across certain events, or just feeling a certain background shadow that begins to rise up on occasion every now and then, where it's just the shadow of doubt, the ghost at the feast, the spectre of doubt. It just creeps in of just, hang on, what if though? What if? What if I'm just experiencing a sort of delusional state? What if this is just wishful thinking? And what if, right, when that happens, just understand that ego has such subtle tricks to whisper in your ear to try and pull you back. That's all it's doing. It's trying to pull you back into old habits, old frameworks, old beliefs, old ways of looking at the world. Just be honest with yourself. Was the old way working? Just be honest with yourself. Was it working? Was it really? Were you really happy? Were you sane? Were you well? Were you, or were you riddled with anxiety and stress and delusion and fear and franticness and illness and problem after problem? The old way wasn't working, okay, and you know it. So this shadow of doubt starts to build up, and you might wonder, am I delusional? Or even that we get this feeling of, well, if I continue this path, so you might feel like, well, I feel at peace. I do understand there's no future, there's no past, but I mean, that's why I've called this the power of now what, because you do come to, well, now what though? What happens next? There is no next. There is no next. But that's a fear that we start to have if we accidentally kind of put our ego shoes back on. Is that right? Now what? What do we do now? Now that we've found presence, what do we do with it? So we start to worry, what's the next step here? What happens next? And you might think, well, if my old ego dissolves any further, do I go nuts now? Is that what happens? Because you might look around and see the real raving lunatics around you and think, is this what happened to them? Were they doing fine? And then all of a sudden they had an experience like I'm having, and then they lose it. Am I going to lose it? Well, firstly, no, that's not what happened to them. And on the subject of that, I'm very well aware of the terminology that I'm using here might not be particularly kind at the moment, because I know I'm using the term crazy and insane and things like that. And actually, I sympathize, empathize, and in many ways, I actually relate to people who suffer from quite severe mental illness. I can really relate to a lot of it. And I go back to the beautiful line in many religious texts that says, "Be kind to them, for their soul is with God." And it really is. We don't, uh, it's sad to see them in the state that they're in, but understand that their soul is with God. And as to the person on the spiritual path, so we're concerned that we may be losing our mind, we may be losing our critical faculties, losing our cognitive function, and thinking, well, what's going to happen to me? But here is the absolute bottom line of things. When you find presence, so you realize there's no future, there's no past, and this thing called an ego is an illusion, an illusory, temporary, finite, separate self that was causing all of my problems. Okay? All of the problems in your life were caused by this core delusion, believing yourself to be the story that you keep telling yourself. And in reality, the book is closed, you put it away, and now you feel serene and at peace. So here's the question I want to ask. Are there many mental illnesses that result in better mental health? What form of insanity, what definition of insanity could include feeling more peaceful, feeling more rational, feeling more logical, being calmer in your body and mind, enjoying better friendships, enjoying a better work life, enjoying a better romantic life, enjoying better family relationships, being able to feel gratitude, being able to forgive, being free to express yourself creatively, artistically, professionally, doing better in life, feeling free to choose the direction you'd like to go. Does any of those things that I just mentioned, would any of those things fit into any definition of insanity, bad mental health, going crazy, whatever you want to call it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense when you look at things logically. And I would always say, whenever you have any of these concerns all of the problems that I bring up in The Power of Now What, all of them just can be answered by just bring yourself back to, yes, but what is my experience? What is my experience? And this is what I always bring it back to, because I've been through all of this. I was worried I was going nuts and realized, no, I was crazy before. Now I'm sane. I know the jury's still out on that one, but still, I would say now I'm more sane than I was anyway. So I always bring it back into my experience and go, hang on, yes, but if I'm crazy, isn't it a bit odd that I feel more stable? Is increased mental stability a symptom of insanity? I wouldn't have thought so. I really wouldn't. And just look to the experience when you feel particularly spiritual, when you feel very spiritual, you know that it's not a delusion. You just know. It's. I would say it's one of the key features when you're having a spiritual experience and there's no doubt. That's when you really know you're having true Kensho or Satori, whatever you want to term it, enlightenment, you're having a real one of the real ones, it's when there's no doubt. The doubt disappears because it's experiential. It's no longer a belief. Beliefs cause a lot of the problems. All right, and many, whether to go into it or not, but all beliefs really are delusional. That's a big statement, I know, but truly, on a very deep level, all beliefs are ultimately delusional. But experience cannot be delusional because experience is reality, the here and now. And if you do, perhaps I was lucky to have a relatively ordered mind, a relatively logical, straightforward mind, and other people I know maybe don't have that. It's maybe a little bit more unfocused, and perhaps going into a spiritual experience and feeling very present, it can feel destabilizing actually, and that must be very scary. It must be. So if that is you and that does happen to you, I would recommend always bring yourself back to the present moment, the here and now, and just stay in experience. Don't add any belief to it. Don't believe any thought that comes in. Don't follow any thought that comes in, any feeling. Yes, even if your heart's beating quickly and all of this and whatever's happening in your mind, the most grounding thing you can do is recognize reality as it is. The most grounding thing you can do is recognize reality as it is. The mind is what fabricates all of the fantasy. The mind is what fabricates all of the crazy this way, that way, mind go here, mind go there, mind go here, monkey mind, they call it in Buddhism, the monkey mind. Yes, it wants to go here, it wants to go there, it wants to monkey around, obviously. But if you constantly bring your attention back, grounded in the present moment, right here, right now, nothing is happening. Nothing at all. There is nothing happening. Nothing has ever happened. There's nothing in the past that you missed. Don't worry. Okay? There's nothing going to happen in the future because there is no such thing. Everything is here and now. And is there a problem now? Absolutely not. Nothing ever happened. Ever. There is nothing more grounding than that. Relax. There's nothing more to process. It's done. It's done. That's it. That's the top of the mountain. It's over. It's over. It was over before it even started because it never started. Nothing ever happened. It's all a fabrication of the mind. The mind wants you to feel like you're going crazy, but it's the mind that is crazy. Leave it. Just leave it alone. Disengage from the mind entirely, and that's where the sanity lies. The ever-present background element of peace, which is pure consciousness, pure experience, the experience of reality without the experiencer, without the individual subject of experience, but just experience alone. That is a grounding experience. It doesn't send you off down crazy pathways. The mind will send you off down a crazy pathway if you hold on to it. Don't do that. Just leave it alone. Leave it alone. So that's my absolute defense against the feeling that you might be going crazy, is to go into your experience and say, right, what definition of insanity could possibly include better mental health? Feeling more at peace, removing anxiety, removing depression, removing addiction, being more at peace, being comfortable in your own skin, being more confident around people, being calmer, more still, more serene, having more logical, ordered thoughts, being able to sift through all of the negative mind patterns and discern between which ones are helpful and which ones are unhelpful. I mean, meditation and finding presence, and the deeper that I went in to the spiritual path, especially the Advaita, the non-dual stuff, the non-dual path. To the outside eye, I mean, I've been very careful not to talk about it too much to too many people because they're just not going to get it. That's a tip I'll get to in a moment. But to the outside eye, they'd say, yep, Corin's absolutely lost it. He's gone completely bananas. He really has. He's drank the Kool-Aid. He's really drank the Kool-Aid right here. He's lost it. But internally, I know my anxiety's disappeared. My depression's disappeared. My addiction's disappeared. Even my obesity, well, where's that now? That's gone. I'm just so what definition of going crazy? And that gave me a big clue. There's a lot of clues along the way. It gave me a big clue not to trust the outside world, instead to trust my inner experience. And do I feel crazy? No, I feel at peace. And if the outside world wants to call me crazy, they can go ahead. Yeah, let me have it. Like, yeah, sure. I mean, they've been calling me crazy since day one. So it's like, actually, no, that's not right. That's not right. Because actually, this is the really sad and disturbing thing. When I was an alcoholic and when I was actually crazy, when I was fully identified, mind identified, and fully egoic, walking around obese, drunk, dressed in bizarre clothes, thinking I was better than everyone else, the whole world thought that was great. The world thought, hey, here, check out the party animal. Here comes that party animal, Corin. He's a great laugh to be around. They thought that was sane. Oh, man. Whereas now, if I'm just sat on a park bench on my own, which is probably the majority of my time, sat on a park bench on my own, people are all looking like, what's he doing? He's just sat there. He's not doing anything. He's just sat there on his own. Why is that crazy? But anyway, anything that sort of sits outside the norm is often seen as crazy, when actually it's probably more sane than anything, because it's the world that's crazy. It's not you. I mean, let's look at the true craziness here. Here's a real definition of insanity for you: believing in an illusory future that can only exist in imagination, and doing things that you hate in the present moment, in the present day, in order to move towards an illusory future that you hope will have better circumstances than your present circumstances. And yet you create negative present circumstances in the hope that you can remove your present negative circumstances because you're moving towards an illusory future. That's nuts. That's nuts. Constantly replaying negative memories from the past that does not exist. It happened, but the past has been and gone. Constantly replaying negative things. I mean, have you ever been laying awake in bed at night and remembered something embarrassing you said 5 years ago? And you sit bolt upright, sweating, and go, oh my word, I've just realized how embarrassing that thing that I said 5 years ago was, right? Constantly replaying memories like that. These memories, by the way, only exist in your mind. Okay? That's crazy. Constantly walking around, talking to yourself in an inner monologue. How many people do that? Talking to yourself. Let's just stop for a second. Let's just stop for a second and really let that sink in. Most people walk around talking to themselves internally in an inner monologue, a back and forth between them and their mind. Who are they talking to? If you talk to yourself in an inner monologue, who is talking to who? Now we're really getting into it, right? We're following the rabbit down the rabbit hole now. Who's really crazy here? The person with no inner monologue? The person who's enlightened and fully present, no inner monologue, no internal thoughts, just pure, open, empty, fully spacious consciousness? Or the person who walks around talking to themselves inside their head? Which one of those people is nuts? So that is the perfect defense internally when you feel like this spiritual path, this spiritual experience is just you going nuts, or you're worried that you're going to lose your mind. I mean, Language is difficult because essentially that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to lose our mind. It's the mind that's causing all the problems in the first place. So a large part of worrying about losing your mind is kind of pointless because you're worried about doing the exact thing that we're trying to achieve. You could say it's almost like if you were, let's say you're running a marathon, you're worried about crossing the finish line because you'll no longer be a marathon runner. Now, if you'd become so fully attached and identified with being a marathon runner, and you really believed your entire existence was that you are this marathon runner, it, when you cross the finish line, the race is over and there's no more marathon runner. Now, if you didn't have the right understanding, you'd realize, no, that's just that all that means is who you are is no longer running a marathon. It doesn't mean that you would cease to exist. This is quite a crucial point. Just it no longer being identified with the mind doesn't mean you'll cease to exist. It doesn't mean you won't be able to think anymore. It doesn't mean you won't be able to look after yourself anymore. It just means you've ceased identifying with the mind, with the body mind, with the individual sense of being a temporary, finite, separate self, and instead recognizing that you are, in fact, the infinite universal consciousness. And it's exactly the same as the marathon runner who believes so much that they are entirely a marathon runner, and that's all that they are. When that finish line starts to approach, they're going to get very worried and think, but once I cross that line, I will cease to exist. Well, the marathon runner will cease to exist, right? But the person running the marathon simply crosses the line and, now the marathon runner has gone and everything else that that person is continues. It's the delusion of identifying too much with a particular aspect of your being. That's essentially what ego identification is. That's essentially what's causing all of the problems on Earth. People believing that they are an individual, temporary, finite, separate self, over identification with a single aspect of being. That's the insanity. It is exactly the same as the marathon runner believing that they'll cease to exist once they cross the finish line. So that's what's happening on the spiritual path sometimes, especially if you're really getting somewhere. Your ego's not going to like that. Your mind, your whole story, it doesn't want to end. So when it can see that you're starting to have these experiences of true presence, true serenity, true peace, your ego's going to have a lot to say about it. But don't worry. Don't worry. And soon, just keep practicing with the spiritual path and all of these things that I'm pointing to and talking about. They fall away. They just reveal themselves to be these little illusory problems that aren't really problems. They're just another gremlin, another gremlin, another gremlin. See you later. They just disappear. Now, I would like to speak to some of the intense experiences that you can have whilst on the spiritual path, and they can be quite disorientating and quite unsettling if you're not properly grounded in understanding. And so forewarned is forearmed. I always like to just understanding is a fantastic defense. Knowledge is power, and understanding what's coming can be very powerful and very stabilizing, because if it hits you unexpectedly, yes, it can make you feel a bit worried that maybe something's happening. So sometimes, maybe deep in meditation, you might experience out-of-body experiences. I've had many of them. They're actually very pleasant, to be honest with you. But I can understand why some people find them very unsettling. I mean, I actually had quite a few out of body experiences when I was a kid. I just didn't know what was happening at the time. I thought it was just imagination. But I would lay awake. I used to love just laying in bed at night before going to sleep and just shutting my eyes. And I would jump out of my body and jump out of my window, and I'd go flying around the village. And I'd go flying up and down the streets, and I'd go flying up over the rooftops and everything. And I thought everyone did this. I just thought that was just something that everyone did, and then I'd come flying back in to my body, and I thought, oh well, that's just like me just imagining things. But then one day I realised that I'd been flying to places in the village that I hadn't actually visited in person in my physical body. And then when I did visit them in my physical body later on, they were exactly as I'd imagined it. But I'd never been there. I'd never seen a map of it. I'd never seen any photos of it or anything. It's that I'd actually. So anyway, yeah. And then later on, it wasn't until I started meditating when I was like 28 and 29, started getting deep into it and having more out of body experiences, that I remembered that I did this as a child and was like, oh, it feels exactly like what I used to do when I was a kid. And I used to just go flying around the village. And you can have these experiences, and they don't feel too unsettling. They could. I can see why they would. Um, Maybe because I'd had a bit of experience when I was a kid. Maybe I'd got my pilot's license or whatever the equivalent is. But that's one of the experiences. You can also maybe experience light phenomena. That's quite interesting. You see certain flashes of light. You can see certain shapes and patterns of light. Again, it's there's a reason that the angels in the Bible, their opening line is always "Be not afraid." Because that's what they need to say, because it's quite frightening if they appear to somebody and you weren't expecting it. So they always say, be not afraid. And remember that. If anything happens to you in meditation, or you've been following a spiritual practice and something out of the ordinary happens, just remember, be not afraid. You are looked after. You are protected. Nothing can actually go wrong. So don't worry. Be not afraid. And on that, with the light phenomena, a really fascinating one is you can see colors that don't exist on the visible spectrum. That's really quite powerful when that happens. You can experience understanding concepts that you would never be able to verbalize, that you would never even be able to cognize, you wouldn't be able to put into thought, or the understanding of the limited capacity of the individual temporary finite ego would not be able to understand it. But deep in meditation, the consciousness just brings it to your awareness, and you understand deeper concepts. Perhaps you become aware of things that are outside of your extrasensory perception can happen. So outside of the conventional perceptions, you might be sensing or feeling. This is one that people can intuit anyway, even without the spiritual path, is just a general sense of energy. Have you ever been walking through town or something, or walking through a place where there are lots of people, and you can just feel the energy that day? You can just feel, oh, it's calm today, or oh, it's a little bit chaotic today. So that normal kind of sense of being able to pick up on energy, that can expand and become deeper and maybe a little bit more vivid. You can actually sort of put more tangible perception on that and draw conclusions from that, and then act in ways according to that. You just sort of see things coming. I'll do an entire episode on the sort of siddhis, they're called, this extra supernatural powers that you can gain from the spiritual practice. I don't want to do it too soon in this series because I don't want to sound crazy. So that if these experiences happen, don't feel like they're a sign that you're losing your mind. They are a sign that you're doing something right. And actually, I would say just focus on the good stuff. Focus on the bits that you know are helping you in your actual body-mind world. So your increased sense of peace, your increased sense of well-being, more calm, orderly thoughts, your ability to you're more comfortable in your own skin, so you can enjoy a better work life, better friendships, better relationships, better family relationships. That's the stuff to focus on. It's incredible, right? The irony of it is, when you do become aware of the spiritual and supernatural world, it's not actually all that interesting. You actually become more invested in the what we would call the conventional world, the mundane world, because it takes on this new shine, it takes on this new glow, and you just because you're more free and able to move around with more energy. That's the more interesting thing. I mean, it's there really is nothing to worry about in terms of this. Like, what if I go crazy? You do actually end up going more sane. And further down the line, I actually find that I fit in with people a lot better now that I've been able to, because the ego is very insecure. The ego is desperate to be liked. The ego is desperate to fit in. And because of that, it makes it hard to fit in. It's hard to socialize if you're worried about everything you say. It's hard to socialize when you're identified with the ego, because you're constantly worried about what you say and what you do, and how you dress and all of that sort of stuff. So that makes it harder, and that will isolate you. But the more I got into dropping the ego away, staying present, no future, no past, just losing this self consciousness and becoming the infinite universal consciousness, the more I found that I could fit in. And then I got it. All of a sudden, I understood people a lot more, and I could relax a lot more and understand people aren't out to get me. And these things that I thought were criticisms coming from people were actually people trying to help me. These aren't accusations. These are things that people are trying to help me. And I definitely feel like the more awake I became, the more conscious I became, the more sane I felt around people and comfortable in my own skin. So, yes, you can have these sort of unsettling sort of experiences, but it won't isolate you or pull you away from people. You will actually feel like you can blend in a lot better. You will finally lose your fear of people. You will finally lose the insecurity, the worry about what people think, about whether you fit in, about whether you're doing it right. All of those little concerns will just drop away. So into the into that this little nuanced area of but if I become present and lose my ego, am I not going to act in an odd way? Won't people start thinking I'm weird? Will I still fit in? Like, what if I forget the rules? Because it does happen. It does happen. That's partly what we're trying to do. Just forget the rules and understand that your body and mind will just act naturally, just more freely and of its own accord. It will just do what it's called to do with a calm, reasonable expression of authenticity. Authentic individual expression is what we're trying to move towards. It doesn't mean that you completely lose your marbles, strip naked, and go running through the street screaming. I'm sure that has happened at some point in the past, but something else is happening. If that's somebody's experienced that, I would say that's probably not a spiritual awakening. That's probably something else. I probably should throw in a disclaimer here. If you are particularly worried about certain chaotic mind patterns that happen to you, then I would see a professional. There's no harm in that. It's not a failure of your spiritual life. It's not a sign that you're doing something wrong in your spiritual practice. It might just be that you need some psychiatric assistance. So if you do have the intense desire to strip naked, go running through the street, that I would say that's probably not spiritual a spiritual experience, and something else is happening there. Generally speaking, I can always only speak to my experience, but I even though I became less concerned about social conventions, I'm not really so worried anymore about if I say the right thing or say the wrong thing, or what the normal thing to do is. Not really bothered about towing the line, so to speak. But people warm to you more when you're authentic because they can feel it on a very deep level. People, it's the same, particularly with animals and children. They warm to you quickly. And adults do it as well, although very ego identified adults get very threatened by somebody at peace. I'll speak to that in a moment. But most of the time, the people that you'd want to hang around with, the nice people, the intelligent people, the kind people, the resourced people, the mature people, those people will warm to you because you're at peace. You just seem settled, even if you're quite eccentric. I mean, even if you're a little odd, even if you sometimes say strange things, if you're at peace within yourself, nobody's going to mind. I mean, do you mind? You're welcoming of other people as your compassion increases, as your warmth increases. You allow other people to have their individual expression. And so your individual expression, all that happens on the spiritual path is you become more of your authentic individual expression of the body mind. Because the ego, the story that was there to bury and mask, the mask that you were wearing falls away, and beautifully revealed is your individual authentic expression of self. And that's it. That's it. Generally characterized by being at peace with oneself and quite calm and usually very loving and usually very compassionate, but not overly so, because there's a lot of egos out there that are playing this game. Okay. All right. And going into that subject right here, there's a lot of egos, very heavily ego identified people who are trying to come across like spiritual people. Okay, now these are probably the most dangerous people you could ever meet. Avoid them, and I would highly recommend you avoid going down this path yourself, because everything that you're worried about on the spiritual path will happen to you if your ego gets a hold of the spiritual journey that you're undertaking and tries to appropriate it for its own gain. If an individual tries to use spirituality for their own gain, trouble happens. Real trouble begins to happen because it's powerful. And egos are very good at identifying with something, taking a hold of it, and then using it. That is not what we're doing. Firstly, the concept of a spiritual person is an oxymoron. So, an oxymoron is where the two words don't work together. So, it's like a cold fire, something like that. A bright darkness. That's an oxymoron. And a spiritual person is an oxymoron. There is no such thing. The more spiritual we get, quote unquote, the more spiritual we get, the less of the person there is. And when somebody has achieved enlightenment, there's no longer a person there. So there is no such thing as a spiritual person. Very, very important to understand. If you have started to feel this presence, this inner peace, this inner stillness, no future, no past, no ego, beautiful. And then you get the idea, oh, great, now I'm going to use this in order to be more liked by people. And I'm going to use this in order to make more money. And I'm going to use this in order to get laid. And I'm going to use this in order to achieve all those egoic things that I couldn't achieve before. Then you are setting yourself up for absolute disaster. And there's something horrible about it. I've seen it happen so many times. I'm in dangerous territory here because I don't like to come across judgmental or anything. As I say about the mountain, we're all on our way up the path. And sometimes that can take so many different forms that it's all good. It's all fantastic. But the amount of times I've seen people who fall into this trap of having all the gear and no idea, right? All the gear, no idea. So you get this in a lot of disciplines like sports where people have all the equipment, but they can't actually play. You know, you could have it in, like, let's say golf. They're head to toe in golf gear. They've got the best clubs, the best shoes, the best golf cart. They're on the best golf course. They have the best golf balls. They got all the gear and they have no idea. They've got the best kit, but they don't know how to play. And they are terrible players at golf. This exact same thing happens on the spiritual path. People have all of the knowledge. They dress in all of the spiritual clothes. They buy all of the crystals. They buy the tarot cards. They buy the incense. There's nothing wrong with these things. These are all very useful things that can be used properly on the spiritual path. Absolutely. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of these things, but I'm saying if you notice somebody has absolutely all of it, but you can sense that they don't have a drop of true peace within them, then you can see what's happening here. Spiritual ego has taken hold. Again, I'll do a whole episode on spiritual ego, but the point here is, as we're talking about fear about going crazy, just to be very, very aware. Be very aware that the ego, being the subtle trickster that it is, will grab hold of your presence, will grab hold of your inner peace and go, superb, we can make a mask out of this. That's exactly how it's going to come. It will say, superb, I can make spiritual clothing. I can make spiritual armor and spiritual weapons out of what we've discovered here. That is a misdirection. Do not follow the ego. It only ever causes trouble. And you will go crazy if you try to develop a spiritual ego. That's where insanity truly lies. Instead, drop away, drop away, drop away. Constantly fall into the open arms of reality. There can't be any delusion. There can't be any craziness when the mind has subsided and you are simply immersed fully in the root and ground of infinite consciousness. Total, pure, empty, open, spacious being. Do it now. Do it right now. Are we still present? Are we right here? Or are we thinking about future, past? Are you trying to think about something I said 5 minutes ago? This, that, and the other. Just drop all of that. Bring ourselves fully into the right here, right now. Maybe you're worried, oh, do I have a spiritual ego? Have I done that spiritual ego he was just warning me about? Oh, what am I going to do? Don't worry. Don't worry. Just keep dropping. It's a letting go. Let go everything. Sometimes it is like you let go of your entire ego, and then you're walking down the street and realize you've picked it back up again. You think, when did I do that? When did I pick that back up? Just drop it again. Don't panic about it. Don't get into a fight about it. It doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. It's not a sign of failure. It's nothing, nothing, nothing. Just drop again. It's just a habit that comes back, and just drop it away, drop it away, drop it away, drop it away. So what if I forget the rules? You won't forget the rules. You don't. You would think, like a lot of people think, that, well, if I become fully liberated and fully free, aren't I just going to act like a wild maniac? Aren't I just going to act like a child again, or a wild animal, like a beast? It just doesn't really happen like that, because why would you? Why would you? It's not the social rules that are in place that are stopping you from acting like a wild animal. Your higher self, your higher reasoning is stopping you from acting like a wild animal, whether the rules are there or not. Even if you were in a place where you were completely alone, let's say you got stranded on a desert island or something, even on a desert island, then you're not going to you're not going to completely lose your reason. You're not going to lose your rationality. You're not going to lose your logic capabilities, your cognitive functioning just because there's nobody around. Now, there's no social rules on a desert island. There's no social constraints whatsoever. Nobody would even know. Nobody would understand. No one would be there to witness any of your behavior anyway. But you wouldn't suddenly start raving and ranting and run around and act like a completely crazed beast, because that wouldn't really make any sense, would it? It wouldn't. You just wouldn't. There'd be no point. It doesn't. Your higher reasoning would still function. And in fact, if we're honest with ourselves, you'd probably start listening to your higher reasoning a lot more. You'd start acting in a far more logical way because it's more important, because you're going to have to survive now. So you're going to really start listening to that higher functioning, your reason, your logic. You're going to listen to it more, even though there are no social constraints around. So that shows us experientially that our behavior is not utterly dictated or constrained by the social construct around us. It's not the social rules that completely dictate our behavior. It's our higher functioning, our higher reason that causes us to act in our own best interest. And even if let's say you did start acting a bit strange, you did start acting a bit odd, does it really matter in the grand scheme of it all? I mean, people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. So even if you did say the occasional strange thing, or you acted in the occasionally bizarre way, who's even really going to mind? People will have forgotten about it by tomorrow, if they even noticed at all. So and so it goes. Like snow upon the desert's dusty face, alights for a little hour or two, and then is gone. But how to embody this? So really embodying this now, just bringing ourselves fully into this presence right here. No future, no past, just right here, right now, fully at peace. And yet you walk out into the world and you can see and feel all the people around you are not at peace, frantic. They're trying to pull you back into your shape. They're trying to pull you back into your ego through no fault of their own. It's just habit. That's just how we are, the actors on the stage, trying to get the other actors to say their lines. So how to fully embody this? Well, how do we act in the world? How do we move and behave? How are we supposed to think and feel? Because you are in this curious position of realizing that you're an actor on a stage. And you slowly come to this realization that just because you figured that out doesn't mean everyone else has. And everyone is firmly convinced. And now a great thing in the street seems any human nod, where move in strange democracy the million masks of God. And you can see everyone acting as a mask of God. And they have all their problems, their trials and tribulations, and you can see you want to say, can just wake up. Just wake up. Just wake up to this peace, because I've discovered this peace, and I want others to have this peace, because it's burning inside of me, and I want others to feel it. But if you push too hard, it breaks the illusion, it breaks the maya, it breaks the play. If you push, you can't take people's mask off by force, because they will panic, they will get scared. You can't just jump on someone and try to rip their mask off. It doesn't work like that. So how to move about in the world without coming across crazy yourself? Well, you just keep focusing on your own inner silence, your own inner peace, and it will radiate outwards, and you won't look crazy. Maybe to some. And I did say at the start I would talk about this. So I was a little... Again, I've made every single mistake under the sun. You will never fail as many times as I've failed. Believe me, team. I've made every single mistake under the sun when it comes to the spiritual journey. And one of them was thinking I could put on all the spiritual clothes and be a preacher of a sort. And it's a, it's, it's, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I definitely, yeah, took on that spiritual ego, and instead it's more about, it's a subtlety. It's a subtlety that works best. Bring yourself fully into your own inner silence, and yes, put your own mask on first. If the plane's going down, you put your own mask on first before helping someone else. You have your own inner silence, and you will begin to radiate this peace. Now, because I put on this sort of spiritual ego, I tried to talk to people about it maybe a bit too soon. Maybe before I had the reasonable language, the terminology needed in order to express it in ways that people would understand. Because if you walked up to someone and said, "Hey, mate, you don't exist," you're not going to say that to the barista, are you? Like, one double espresso. I'll have a pan au chocolat, and you don't exist. They'll say, "I'm sorry, what?" Or if you were to say, if your boss is like, have you got that, your manager says, do you have the that report? And you go, oh, sorry, I'm not going to do reports anymore because I'm not an individual, temporary, finite, separate self. I am actually the infinite universal consciousness. These reports, I'm really sorry, but they're just a fabrication of the Maya. They are illusory, temporary, finite objects, and I'm not paying attention to illusory, temporary, finite objects anymore. I'm going to fully immerse myself within the root and ground of being. The manager would look at you and say, oh, okay, right, and would probably start filing out a cause for concern form underneath the desk. Um, and, I didn't go to that extreme, but I definitely did have an element of that in the early days of my spiritual practice. And you got to be careful who you speak to. In in some ways, simply because the people that you're surrounded by in the early days of your spiritual practice are going to be the people who were there in your old life. Now you'll keep many of them, but some of them you won't. And they're going to be the people who are occupying the same space as in the framework of the life that you were living, in the belief system that you were living. They were there as friends and family and jobs and all of that. That was the framework and the mechanism by which you were living your life in your old belief system. And now that's dropping away. Your new understanding and your new experiences, it's not going to land in the right place. It's not out of any sense of malice on anyone else's part. They're not. In my experience, people want to understand you, people want to accept you, but they can't do that if what you're saying goes against their fundamental way of perceiving reality. So you've got to be subtle. You have to practice a bit of discernment. I would hope that at some point in the future it doesn't have to be like that, because I do believe that science at some point is going to start looking at consciousness more deeply. I truly hope they begin to do this, because it is the ultimate science, ultimately. And anyway, I'll get to that in a moment, but just to this, be careful who you speak to about this. It is sad that you have to kind of hold back a little bit, especially if you've had particularly deep spiritual experiences. You want to tell everyone, and you want to tell your friends, you want to tell your family, you want to tell everyone at work. You want to walk out of your job, you want to walk out of certain relationships, sure. But it will take a bit of discernment about who to speak to about this sort of stuff. And if you do start speaking to people about this sort of stuff, just putting things across in a way that is reasonable. In some ways, it's more egoic to start, I'm walking around saying, yeah, I've figured out the infinite universal consciousness, like, check me out. That's ego. That wasn't me being authentic. That wasn't me being immersed in consciousness. That was me being egoic. I wanted to appropriate my understanding for my own gain. Look how cool I am. Look how interesting I am. But as you begin to deepen your understanding, become more peaceful and still inwardly, just people who understand what you're talking about and your new energy, your new expression in life will start to gravitate towards you. And every now and then you'll just have a conversation with someone who gets it, and you just connect. It's incredible, really. You do know. You just know. You just start talking to someone, and it could even be somebody you've only just met. If you've ever had this experience, there's somebody you've only just met, and yet you feel like you've known them your entire life. You want to know why that happens? Because you have known them your entire life. Because we are one consciousness. That's why it feels like you've known them your entire life. It just so happens that both of your individual body minds are aligned enough that they remind each other of that fact. Okay? So sometimes when your body mind and somebody else's body mind are aligned enough, maybe they could be very yin and very yang, or they had similar experiences or something, it reminds you that we all come from that same source, the secret water from which we all drink. Or to use the Dodgems analogy, we're all piloting our individual Dodgems thinking that we're powered by our own little car. But actually, if you look up, it's the ceiling that powers all of us. So being a bit more subtle, and sometimes you just have to have your inner stillness. I actually have a Zen poem here that is one of my absolute favorites, and I'll read a few Zen poems over the next few episodes because I forgot I had this book, but it's absolutely amazing. But this one is called Worship Service, and it goes, "In a snowfall that obscures the winter grasses, a white heron, using his own form to hide himself away." And to me, that speaks volumes to how to embody peace. Is use this body mind, this form, is now a wonderful vessel to exude peace, especially if you're using this form. So I still wear my sports gear, my training gear from, personal training, going to the gym and stuff like that. I'm using my own form to hide myself. And I can do more for spreading the message wearing sports gear than I could if I was wearing Buddhist robes. Because if I walked through town wearing Buddhist robes, everybody would look at me and go, that guy, one, he's a Buddhist, and two, he's probably nuts. So they would have their defenses up the moment they saw me. But if I walk through town wearing sports gear, people go, oh, it's a gym guy. And they might chat on gym terminology. And that's absolutely great. I love it. I love talking about gym stuff. I love, just talking about normal things, just talking about everyday, mundane, normal things. But every now and then, somebody can just, even if all we're talking about is the weather, I'm just talking about, oh, it's a nice day today. They can just sense there's something else being transmitted. Yeah. And I would recommend that's how to do this, because you want to share it. But if you share it too aggressively and too eccentrically, it's going to put people off. If you share it in too, you see it in just these bizarre, outlandish displays sometimes, and it's not going to reach the people it needs to reach. We can't be preaching to the choir. Because we don't need to preach to the choir. The choir's already converted. We need to find a way to spread the message more subtly, more peacefully, and it will... Everyone's got their shield up these days. Everyone's got their defenses up. Everyone's drawn a line in the sand and taken their defensive stance. Spreading peace it's not about pointing weapons at each other. It's about everybody put their weapons down. That's how we're going to find peace on Earth. Because everyone's holding a weapon to each other. And it's about... nobody wants to be the first one to put their weapon down. But the more of us that can just put it down and say, well, whatever. Okay, whatever. I don't mind anymore. Just whatever. That's how we're eventually It's like putting an ice cube in warm water and just leave it. It's going to take a while, but eventually the ice cube will melt. Put your weapon down first, everyone will put it down around you. So what if you forget the rules? Well, it doesn't matter so much. What if you want to embody the practice? Well, just don't do it quite so eccentrically, I would recommend. What if you have some of these intense psychedelic experiences? Well, they're just another thing to observe. Just as you observe the mundane thought. So the mundane thought might come up, oh, I need to send that email. I should have sent that email to that person the other day and I didn't. In meditation, we ignore that thought. Now, you ignore that thought in exactly the same way that if a light phenomena occurs in front of you and there's a marvelous display of colors that you've never seen before and no humans ever experienced before, you ignore that as well. You just observe it. Don't hold on to it with the mind. Don't attach to it. Because then what happens is you start to want more of that experience. It's just another experience that you're attaching to. We need to jump over the moon. Jump over the moon. It's good. It's a good sign if you have these experiences, but don't attach to those as well. Because a lot of people, they have a supernatural experience, hold on to that experience, and then they want to tell everybody about that experience. They become attached and identified with the experience. It's just another experience. No matter how wonderful, supernatural it is, just keep going upwards. Shoot upwards until you have jumped over the moon. On the way back down, then you can hold on to whatever you want to hold on to, but first jump over the moon. So any of these marvelous experiences that you have, don't hold on to them. And worrying about stuff is another form of attachment. Worrying about going crazy, it's just the last gasp of the ego, just trying its final way of tripping you up as you walk out of the door. Yeah, just as you're right, I'm done with this ego. I'm done with the Maya. I am done with the matrix. I've had enough. Enough of this ego. Enough of the story. I'm walking out the door. And the last thing the ego will do is try and trip you up or tie your laces together so you trip and bang your head. And one of the ways it does that is through anxiety and fear. But what you should be truly afraid of is the life you're already living. Right? That's the true madness. Go and look around. Just go and look around. Scroll through Facebook. Scroll through Instagram. It's crazy out there. To quote the Joker film, Joaquin Phoenix Joker, he says, is it just me? Or is it getting crazier out there? Oh, marvelous. In fact, some of the lines in that film are incredibly spiritual. Incredibly spiritual. There's a marvelous one where Joker, Arthur Fleck, he says, like, but why would I do that? Like, why would I lose my own sign? And his boss says, I don't know. Why does anybody do anything? And you can see in Arthur Fleck's face, that's the moment he really loses it. That's the moment that he snaps, is when his boss says, why does anybody do anything? That got him. In many ways, that's a very spiritual question. It's a very enlightening and liberating question. Why does anybody do anything? Ugh. The nature of delusion hides within it the seeds of sanity. Because if you begin to look and truly analyze your own delusions and try to see which of your beliefs are true and which are delusional, you have a lifetime of spiritual practice right there. You want to know why? Because all beliefs are ultimately delusional. The only thing that we can be truly certain of is our experience. And this can have, yes, a maddening effect. It can. Because you tie yourself up in knots. You run around in circles. But the purpose of many spiritual practices is to exhaust the seeker to the point the seeker gives up. And at the point you give up, that's when you become enlightened. when you finally let go, because you realize it's all the same thing. Whether I'm trying to achieve something in the gym or achieve something professionally or achieve something romantically or achieve something spiritually, it's all delusion, because ultimately nothing is happening. All beliefs require the mind to believe something is true for which it has absolutely no evidence. Now that is delusion. And Mr. Scientist Man comes along and says, yes, well, that's why we came up with science. And science is the ultimate cure for delusion, because we have these repeatable experiments that prove that we do know what is absolutely true. I'm really sorry to break the spell on this one, but even science is a system of beliefs. How do I know that? Because we're always going to be relying on our senses, and our senses, although convincing, can also lie to us. There is no way to know anything for 100% certain. No way of knowing. Even if I was to hold up a tennis ball and drop it, we would like to say with absolute certainty it will definitely drop and hit the ground. And every time you do it, it does. But that does not mean that you can say with 100% certainty that it definitely will. Although something appears absolutely certain, it's not 100% certain, because it's our senses that could always be lying to us. Always. We have to believe that what we are sensing is the reality of the situation. But our senses can lie to us. There was a time that the science said the earth is flat. We just knew it to be true because our senses told us so. It wasn't until later on that we had more knowledge that we realized, no, the earth is round. And it's going to be exactly the same thing when it comes to consciousness, because our senses tell us that you are an individual body mind, that your consciousness inhabits the brain. But experientially, have you ever experienced being a brain? Have you ever experienced anything other than experience? The only thing that you can say for absolute certain, that you can say for absolute 100% certainty, is that you are experiencing experience. That's it. There is nothing else you can be certain of. Everything else beyond that is a delusion. Now. Listen, it might be a very reasonable delusion. It might be a very rational delusion. It might be a very necessary delusion. A delusion that has got us very far and has brought us to great things, okay? But a delusion nonetheless. Because ultimately, the only thing that you can actually be certain of is that you are experiencing experience. I mean, ask yourself now, am I experiencing experience? What you are experiencing doesn't matter quite so much at this point. Just ask yourself, am I experiencing experience? Now, true sanity, true rationality, and therefore true science is certainty. We are looking, even true philosophy, it's about truth. What is true? The only thing that we can know for certain is experience. Although Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Was that Descartes or Camus? My apologies, philosophers. I know some of them listen to this. Whether it's Descartes or Camus who said, I think, therefore I am, unfortunately, that can't be true. I am, therefore I am. That makes more sense. That's more true. Because I can experience thought, but that doesn't mean that I am thought. All that can mean is that I'm experiencing thought. So to take it back to that tennis ball analogy, because I know that was kind of confusing, But all that you can know for certain is that you're experiencing dropping the tennis ball. And although you can make a very reasonable prediction that it will drop every single time, you can't know it for certain. You can reasonably deduce that it always will, but you can't know it for absolute certain. And that brings us to the potentially maddening question of, well, what can I know for certain? Well, you can know for certain that you are experiencing experience always. You will always be experiencing experience. Certainty is sanity. Truth is sanity. So if you're ever worried that you're losing your marbles, just bring yourself back and ask yourself, am I experiencing experience? And am I experiencing experience now, in this present moment? No future, no past, no imagination, no story, no mind projected fantasy, no narratives, no people, nothing. Just experience now. Open, empty, spacious, clear. Say nothing, do nothing, think nothing. It is over. No more madness, no more delusion, no more craziness. The mind is delusion. That is what it's there for. The ego is delusion. The person is delusion. You were crazy before, now you are going sane. Sane, perhaps for the first time in your entire life. And always ask yourself, who's really mad? Go look around outside, scroll through Facebook, scroll through Instagram. The world has gone crazy. Crazy. It is not you sat inside, calm, peaceful, well, meditating, looking out the window, enjoying the bliss of being. That's not mad. What's mad is the people out there running around, drunk, yelling at each other, trying in workplaces, desperately trying to impress people they don't even like, to be respected by people that they don't even respect themselves, to prop up this illusory imaginary image, to make a bigger number on a screen, to try and create a security in a future that doesn't even exist, in a world that does not. There's no such thing as security. So this constant attempt to create a secure reality around us, that's the crazy part. But you meditating at peace, letting go, that's more sane than anything. More sane than anything. It's not you that's nuts. It's the world out there. That's everything I have for you today on the subject of the fear of going crazy on the spiritual path. People even who haven't even gone on a spiritual path, who are at spiritual zero, who have had no spiritual experiences, a lot of people actually worry about going crazy, even without any of this. A lot of people, and I think they're intuiting that something's not right. I think that's what's happening. So it's not unique to the spiritual path, the fear of going crazy. A lot of people are afraid of going crazy. And I think they're intuiting that something's not right. They don't even realize they've already gone crazy. They couldn't be more crazy because they're identified as an illusory, temporary, finite, separate self. And that's the insanity. So that's everything on The Power of Now What, episode 15, The Fear of Going Crazy. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. It is an absolute honor and a blessing to have the people listening to this podcast. If you follow me on Spotify, don't forget to go and subscribe on YouTube. I am there just under my name, Corin Bryant. And if you follow me on YouTube, don't forget to follow me on Spotify so you can listen here, there, and absolutely everywhere. I'm on there as The Power of Now What, Overcoming Awakening Problems, the podcast. You can find me on Instagram, Corin_Bryant_, and you can find me on Facebook, Corin Bryant, meditation coach and personal trainer. That's everything I have for you today, team. Take care, be well, and stay present.